A symbol of revolution and the fight for freedom, Fidel Castro's story is a complex tale of hope and horror. Villainized by the media and hunted by the American government, Castro remains one of the most controversial figures in history. But do you truly know the full story of how he rose to power and led one of the world's most infamous revolutions? Join us as we unravel the extraordinary journey of Cuba's Fidel Castro. Watch the full video to uncover the secrets behind the legend. Fidel Alejandro Castro Ruz was born on August 13, 1926, in the small rural town of Biran, Cuba. His father, Ángel Castro, was a wealthy Spanish immigrant and sugarcane farmer, while his mother, Lina Ruz, was a domestic servant who later became Angel's second wife. Growing up amidst the vast sugar plantations, young Fidel was exposed to the stark contrasts between the affluent and the impoverished, a dichotomy that would profoundly shape his worldview. Fidel's early years were marked by privilege and opportunity, yet he was acutely aware of the inequalities surrounding him. His parents sent him to the best schools they could afford. At 19, Fidel enrolled at the University of Havana, a hub of intellectual fervor and political activism. It was here that he found his calling. Immersed in an environment of debate and dissent, he quickly became involved in student protests against corruption and the existing political order. The university was a melting pot of ideas, and Fidel's passion for justice and equality was ignited. He honed his oratory skills, impressing peers and professors alike. But how would this idealistic young man channel his burgeoning political fervor? What path would he take to address the injustices he saw? In 1947, a pivotal opportunity arose. Fidel joined an expedition aimed at overthrowing the Dominican Republic's dictator, Rafael Trujillo. Although the mission ultimately failed, it marked Fidel's first foray into revolutionary activity and steeled his resolve to fight tyranny. Undeterred by this initial setback, Fidel returned to Cuba, more determined than ever. He began organizing a movement to challenge the corrupt Batista regime, believing that direct action was necessary to bring about change. This culminated in the 1953 attack on the Moncada barracks, an audacious yet ill-fated attempt to ignite a revolution. The Moncada assault ended in disaster. Many of Fidel's comrades were killed, and he was captured. Facing trial, he delivered a powerful defense speech that resonated far beyond the courtroom. It was here that he declared, "History will absolve me," a statement that would echo through the ages. Sentenced to 15 years in prison, Fidel's spirit remained unbroken. He used his imprisonment to reflect, strategize, and solidify his vision for Cuba's future. The Moncada attack, though a failure, had laid the groundwork for a movement that would soon shake the very foundations of Cuban society. What would become of Fidel Castro after his release from prison? How would his vision evolve, and what steps would he take to transform Cuba forever? Following his release from prison in 1955, Fidel Castro faced a pivotal decision: how to continue his fight against the oppressive Batista regime. With his spirit unbroken, he sought new allies and strategies that would eventually lead to a revolution. Exiled in Mexico, Fidel found himself surrounded by a diverse group of revolutionaries. It was here that he met Ernesto Che Guevara, an Argentine doctor with a shared vision of social justice and revolutionary change. Together, they formed the 26th of July movement, named after the failed Moncada barracks attack. This group aimed to overthrow Batista and establish a government that would serve the people of Cuba. But how would this fledgling movement turn its bold ideas into reality? In November 1956, Castro and his comrades set sail on the Granma yacht, bound for Cuba. The journey was fraught with challenges, including poor weather and navigational errors. Upon arrival, they were met with immediate hostility from Batista's forces. Despite suffering heavy losses, the surviving rebels, including Castro and Guevara, retreated to the Sierra Maestra Mountains. It was here, in the dense jungle, that they established a guerrilla base and began their campaign of resistance. How would this small band of revolutionaries overcome the might of Batista's military?
First films of Cuban rebel leader Fidel Castro and his ragged force in their mountain stronghold, made shortly before fighting erupted in all 6 of Cuba's provinces. This is the band, numbered at about 1,000, that for 16 months has held out in the rugged Sierra Maestra Mountains near the island's eastern tip. Ill-supplied, they make many of their weapons in crude jungle workshops.
In the Sierra Maestra, Castro and his fighters employed guerrilla tactics to harass and weaken Batista's forces. Key battles, such as the attack on La Plata and the Battle of El Uvero, demonstrated their growing strength and strategic prowess. As they gained momentum, Castro's movement garnered support from peasants and urban workers alike. The revolutionaries' commitment to land reform and social justice resonated deeply with the oppressed population. Internationally, their cause attracted attention and support, further bolstered by effective propaganda efforts. With each victory, the revolutionaries grew bolder, but so did the risks they faced. How would Castro and his band of rebels continue to build their movement amidst increasing danger and Batista's desperate attempts to crush them?
From his stronghold in the wild Sierra Maestra Mountains, Cuba's Fidel Castro emerged triumphant after 2 years of guerrilla warfare against the Batista regime. A revolution that began with Castro a fugitive, practically alone, landing with 82 followers, to be nearly wiped out by government forces, ended with the flight of dictator Fulgencio Batista and the entry into Havana of rebel forces to be acclaimed by the citizens.
The dawn of January 1st, 1959, marked the culmination of years of struggle. Batista's regime crumbled under the relentless pressure of Fidel Castro's revolutionary forces. The tyrant fled Cuba, leaving a power vacuum that would soon be filled by a new, radical vision for the nation. The overthrow of Batista signaled the end of an era of oppression and corruption. But as the euphoria of victory faded, Castro faced a new challenge. How would he transform a war-torn nation into a nation of revolutionary ideals? Castro swiftly moved to consolidate his power. The establishment of a revolutionary government brought sweeping changes. Trials and executions of Batista's supporters sent a clear message that the old order was gone and a new one had taken its place. Nationalization of industries and agrarian reforms aimed to dismantle the economic structures that had perpetuated inequality, and major industries were brought under state control. These bold moves sought to lay the foundation for a socialist state, but they also drew fierce criticism and fear of authoritarianism. As Castro's government solidified its grip, the international community watched with bated breath. How would this fledgling revolution navigate the treacherous waters of global politics, especially with the Cold War casting its long shadow? In the context of the Cold War, Castro's Cuba quickly became a focal point of East-West tensions. The relationship with the Soviet Union deepened, bringing economic aid and military support, but also aligning Cuba with the communist bloc. The Bay of Pigs invasion in 1961, a failed attempt by US-backed exiles to overthrow Castro, only solidified his resolve and his alliance with the USSR. The stakes escalated dramatically during the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, when the world teetered on the brink of nuclear war over Soviet missiles stationed in Cuba. The resolution of the crisis left Cuba more isolated, yet firmly entrenched in its revolutionary path. As Castro navigated these geopolitical upheavals, the question remained, what would life under his regime look like for the Cuban people? Following his triumphant rise to power, Fidel Castro set out to transform Cuba into a socialist state. His vision promised sweeping reforms and a society based on equality and justice. But what was life really like under Castro's rule? One of Castro's most lauded achievements was his overhaul of healthcare and education. Cuba's healthcare system became one of the best in the world, offering free universal medical care to all citizens. Similarly, education was made accessible to everyone, dramatically improving literacy rates across the country. Beyond healthcare and education, Castro implemented housing and labor policies aimed at reducing inequality. New housing projects provided homes for the poor, and labor laws were designed to protect workers' rights. However, these ambitious policies came with their own set of challenges. How would Castro's government manage the growing economic pressures? The economic landscape under Castro was fraught with difficulties. The US embargo, imposed in the early 1960s, severely crippled Cuba's economy, cutting off a major trading partner and access to essential goods. In response, Castro sought to diversify Cuba's economy and reduce its dependence on sugar exports. However, these efforts were often undermined by inefficiencies and mismanagement. The reliance on Soviet aid provided some relief, but it also tied Cuba's fate to the whims of another superpower. As the economic situation worsened, how would the Cuban people cope with the growing scarcity and hardship? Castro's regime maintained tight control over political opposition. Dissent was swiftly and often brutally suppressed, with many opponents imprisoned or exiled. The media was tightly controlled, ensuring that only the government's narrative prevailed. Despite these repressive measures, discontent simmered beneath the surface. In 1980, the Mariel boat lift saw over 125,000 Cubans flee to the United States, seeking freedom and better opportunities. This mass emigration highlighted the deep-seated frustrations and challenges within Castro's Cuba. As Castro's grip on power tightened, the question remained: what would be the long-term impact of his policies on Cuban society? Would the gains in healthcare and education outweigh the costs of economic hardship and political repression? As the revolutionary fires he ignited transformed Cuba, Fidel Castro's influence extended far beyond its shores. His legacy is one of both admiration and controversy, marked by his unwavering support for revolutionary movements and his impact on global politics. Castro positioned himself as a champion of anti-imperialism, offering support to revolutionary movements across Latin America, Africa, and beyond. From aiding the Sandinistas in Nicaragua to supporting liberation movements in Angola and Mozambique, Castro's Cuba became a beacon for those fighting against colonialism and oppression. His influence was particularly strong in Latin America, where he inspired generations of leaders and activists to pursue radical change. However, his internationalist endeavors also drew criticism, particularly from Western powers who viewed him as a destabilizing force. How did these global engagements shape both Castro's image and the countries he sought to aid? And as his health began to decline, how would the torch of leadership be passed on? In the 1990s, Castro's health began to deteriorate, leading to a gradual transfer of power to his brother Raúl Castro. Despite his declining health, Fidel remained a powerful symbol of the revolution, continuing to influence Cuban politics and policies from behind the scenes. Raúl's leadership marked a new chapter for Cuba, with cautious economic reforms and a slightly more open stance towards the international community. Yet Fidel's legacy loomed large, his revolutionary ideals continuing to shape the nation's identity. How did Cubans and the world reconcile Fidel's towering legacy with the changes ushered in under Raúl's leadership? And what would the future hold for a nation still so deeply connected to Fidel's vision? On November 25, 2016, Fidel Castro passed away, leaving behind a nation and a world reflecting on his complex legacy. His death marked the end of an era, but the debates about his impact had only just begun. Today, Cuba stands at a crossroads, grappling with economic challenges and seeking its place in a rapidly changing global landscape. The discussions about Castro's legacy are as polarized as ever. Was he a hero who uplifted the downtrodden, or a dictator who suppressed dissent? As we reflect on Fidel Castro's life, from his early political awakening and revolutionary triumphs to his enduring influence and the contentious debates he sparked, we are left with profound questions. How will history ultimately judge Fidel Castro, and what path will Cuba take in the post-Castro era? If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to our channel, like the video, and leave a comment below about what you learned or what you'd like to see next.